Okay, so today what we're going to do is have a really basic introduction to Hindu deities. That is, we're going to talk about the Trimurti. That's a Sanskrit word, obviously related to the European cognate words, meaning Trinity, triumvirate, although it doesn't exactly mean the same thing as the Trinity in the sense of the Christian Trinity, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. But again, this is a video for if you just want to get a basic start on what are the basic Hindu deities, so you can start looking for that more on your own. So let's go then to this presentation here. Okay. And that is Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, the Hindu Trimurti. I'm also going to talk about Devi, the female incarnation of these avatars. So we're going to talk about what they are. We're going to talk about what distinguishes these deities, these avatars, what relates them to each other, and so on. Again, just in terms of getting started here to start our studies. Okay, so the Trimurti is what we call syncretic. If you're taking this class from me, I talk about this concept of syncretic quite a lot. It means that what you have is something that is an accretion, something that's been built up over time from one tradition. Often syncretic often means that there are elements from other traditions. Of course, we've seen that Hinduism is sort of, in a sense, the kind of ultimate. Let me even step out of this for just a second to talk about this. So you have the Indian subcontinent. This is, again, very basic stuff from like the first day of class. You have the Indian subcontinent and south of the Himalayas, a tremendous riverine system with a number of very large rivers, not the least of which is the Ganges River, but a number of other rivers as well, and across a very vast area. And from very early on then, such a place on Earth was populated by people, farming, settling people. We don't have to go into the whole history of that, which we do in the class, but the point is that then you have over time cultural unification of across a very large area with a tremendously diverse. I mean, in the Indian subcontinent, there are hundreds and hundreds of languages, hundreds and hundreds of different sort of ethnic identities, let alone devotional traditions. So when we say syncretic, and especially in the case of, I think of looking at Hindu iconography, the point is you're looking at a whole lot of stuff that's all been kind of unified into a really vast, it's really best to approach it as a kind of vast literature. And as I've talked about a lot, you don't really get a handle on it in some sort of systematic way, the way you might do with Hesiod's theogony or something like that. So, okay, so let's get back to sharing that. Okay, so now in the Christian tradition, you would say, if you're talking about the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, you'd be talking about something that really was systematically related, that all kind of hung together with a central narrative, so they all made sense in relation to each other. The triumvirate of Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma is not really like that. It's really, again, more of an amalgamation. You had these deities, and they competed with other deities for primacy over the centuries, and eventually you got a codification of, a popular kind of codification that this was the sort of the triumvirate. But as I've been explaining, and we'll talk about a little bit here, that doesn't necessarily mean something quite as formal and rule governed in the Hindu tradition as it might in other traditions, which have a greater degree of cultural unity. What you have in the Hindu tradition, again, is a whole bunch of stuff that's come from a very vast area. Now, so you have Shiva and Vishnu and Brahma. There is such a thing as Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and these, of course, are traditions that put those respective deities, Shiva and Vishnu, at the center. Another thing about the sort of syncretic nature of Hinduism is it's both monotheistic and polytheistic. So the polytheistic deities, all these avatar deities, are doing all kinds of work, but at the same time, there's definitely a very strong notion of unity and of a oneness and sort of monotheistic concept as well. So, so you can sort of define oneself in Hinduism. Of course, there are traditions. Of course, there are people who, many ordinary people have ordinary devotions. They're not going to be spending a lot of existential time deciding whether they're this or that. But we're here at the university studying Hinduism, and what you can see is that you have a lot of room. Think of, maybe you might know, here we're in Puerto Rico, maybe you might know Catholic people who enjoy going to evangelical Protestant services just because they're fine and they get some spirituality out of it. And that kind of freedom certainly exists within the Hindu tradition and within India as well. So we say Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, but Brahma, and I say Brahman there in the last, it's really Brahma, because I'll explain the difference between Brahma and Brahman in a minute. In that last bullet point, it should say Brahma like it does in the first bullet point. But anyway, Brahma isn't really someone who fits systematically in the folkloric tradition that Shiva and Vishnu both occupy. Brahma is really more the avatar of the monotheistic God, sort of whatever, either the creator of the universe or the being that causes the universe to be able to exist, the condition of the universe, that kind of thing that we find more in sort of monotheistic religions is really signified or represented by Brahma. So again, really, you don't have some sort of big story that unifies Shiva and Vishnu and Brahma, although there are a lot of connections between Shiva and Vishnu. So Shiva, let's talk about Shiva first. Lots of people, what order do you do them in? Lots of people will talk about Vishnu first. I talk about Shiva first because I think two things. One is, I think Shiva is really maybe the oldest of these gods, although all three of these avatars and Diva and Devi, the female avatar, are very, very old indeed. But also because I think with Shiva and this name, the destroyer, that people, it's not actually, well, we're going to talk about right now. I think Shiva gets at some, what I would think of as more characteristic of Asian philosophical thinking, as opposed to, say, Brahma, who, as I say, really is very similar to the Abrahamic god, and Vishnu, who again is much more sort of nurturing and moral avatar kind of god than Shiva. Shiva is a force of nature. Shiva is very old. Shiva, coming from the earliest Indus Valley deities back before the second millennium BCE, before the Aryan migrations changed the complexion of Indus Valley society. So I want to sort of liberalize this notion of Shiva the destroyer, Shiva who comes along and destroys, Shiva the destroyer of worlds, as John Donne said in his poem, quoted by Robert Oppenheimer at the atomic test. Really think of creative destruction, so sort of tearing the old down to make way for the new. That's really the idea. And remember, in this votive fire tradition coming from way back in the Indic past, the spiritual sense of it is the ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that you come out of nature and go back into nature. And so in that sense, then a transformative God that's causing one thing to cease and another thing to begin isn't necessarily a negative God. If you think of Shiva as wrathful, destroyer is going to come along and kill us. But being in touch with the nature of Shiva is, again, part of spiritual preparation for being ready to die, the mark of a spiritual person. I would say, in terms of Shiva, I say there in that first bullet point, he's sort of like the Old Testament God, again, very wrathful, not a God that you pray to a lot because you're not going to necessarily get a whole lot of a response. You're going to do your devotions as properly as you can. So that Abrahamic monotheism, by which I mean, some people asked about this the other day, you have sort of the Judaism and then Christ and Muhammad are two Jews who have off splits, Christianity and Islam, which come out of Judaism. The second bullet point, I want to get a little more philosophical about this because I think this is really something else that's going on. When we're trying to cope with the concept of Shiva as destroyer and Shiva as devotional avatar, as deity. Think of that. I'll introduce another concept, which is Atman. Atman, regarding a human being, an Atman is an enlightened person. In the Buddhist tradition, sometimes it means a self-taught or self-enlightened person, but in general, Atman is an enlightened person, a wise person, a self-aware person. And the Atman, capital T, capital A there, the Atman is sort of the Godhead, the consciousness of the cosmos. There is an agreement here with some ideas that we find, for example, in Plato, that the cosmos, in order to be a moral place, sort of needs also to be a person that's making decisions. And so the Atman is this sort of self-consciousness of the cosmos. But what I want to get at that, I see there the Atman, whose awareness has transcended their worldly incarnation, okay, the spiritual person who no longer identifies primarily with their body and with the life of their body in this tradition. And prakti is the second bullet point there, are these mental formations, including fear of death and fear of change, fear of changing my life, fear of changing my livelihood, my relationships, my location. A lot of Asian classical philosophy, remember all classical philosophy, wherever it comes from, is not only about abstraction, it's also about practical reality and emotional reality. And so, so if you think about it, I mean, so here's a cosmological idea. An individual person keeps on criticizing themselves and evolving and overcoming their last version and becoming something new. That's sort of what a forward-looking life is like. But when we see things changing in the universe, when we see nature moving that way, growth and change, maybe it's the same kind of thing. Maybe the universe also is an Atman with self-consciousness that is also criticizing itself and evolving and becoming something more or different than what it was before. Maybe it's the same kind of process. Remember, ancient causation tends to be more psychological than physical. And that's what we call sort of panpsychism. And finally, the last bullet point too, which is another fairly, I think, fairly deep philosophical point, that is that since Shiva is a transformative energy, a transformative spirit, then Shiva is not wedded to anything. Shiva doesn't have prakti, which are mental formations. My mental formation that I'm in this and that I'm in that I'm in this situation that I can't get out of, that I'm this kind of person, there's nothing I can do about it. And again, very characteristic of Asian philosophy, the I Ching is like this, to try to open up possibilities for thinking outside of these various prakti boxes that we're in. So, so the last bullet point, again, the first line, when you read the first line of the Tao Te Ching, it says, well, when you read into the Tao Te Ching, it starts to talk about transcending right and wrong and values, a tricky and dangerous kind of concept. But here with Shiva, we can see fairly quickly, since Shiva is all about change, then Shiva is not invested in anything that exists right now. And in a sense, that is the enlightenment of Shiva. Another thing about all these gods, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, is that it's not just sort of humbling oneself before the god, but the gods are also models. I mean, we want to see the virtues of the gods and we want to emulate those virtues in ourselves. So here's some Shiva iconography I pulled off the internet. You can do it as well as I can. This is actually hitting all the basic ones in terms of Shiva iconography. The crescent moon. The crescent moon doesn't say this here, but the crescent moon is, well, it does a tinge of mind. That is right, enough, a little bit of mind, a little bit of crazy mind. The snake symbolizing alertness. Again, remember I was talking about self-awareness, the kind of self-awareness that comes through meditation, for example. The trident, waking, dreaming, and sleeping. Again, notice Shiva beyond, Shiva then going beyond these states of mind of human beings. And similarly with the third eye. Shiva, the transcendence of my humanity, my being as a particular type of animal, and understanding this creative flow of nature and transformation of nature. And that's the thing before which I humble myself in the spiritual practice. And the drum expanding and collapsing, which is nice, because obviously what that is a symbol of some cosmology, some cyclic cosmology. Okay, now we'll talk about the poem. Statue of Shiva in a high Ganges river. The Ganges river flows from Shiva's hair. And here you see Shiva, and you see Shiva with the serpent around his neck, and he's got the crescent moon on his head, and so on. So art history in this Hindu and Indian tradition is going to be a lot of iconography like this, because as you know, there's a lot of these statues and paintings and things. And one basic sort of ability is the ability to identify these icons. There's Shiva, the destroyer, with his crescent moon and his snake and his trident and his drum. Vishnu. Now, people often call Vishnu the preserver. I'm going to go ahead and call Vishnu the angelic deity, because Vishnu is the deity that appears to you in the guise and incarnations of various avatars. I always think about those old 40s movies where, you know, Cary Grant or somebody like that is really an angel at Christmas or something like that. Vishnu has that kind of energy. Vishnu, you don't know that you're talking to Vishnu, but you are. Vishnu has come in disguise to help straighten you out. I mean, that's sort of the classic Vishnu narrative. And I think calling Vishnu the preserver is sort of a reaction from Shiva as the destroyer. But, you know, what do I know? I mean, you don't take me too seriously. But as I say, second bullet point, Krishna, for example, and there are, again, all of this is up for grabs. There are traditions where Krishna is the main god, but Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. And Rama, the hero of the Ramayana, Rama, the righteous warrior defending cosmic justice, is also an avatar of Vishnu. But there are many avatars of Vishnu. I think when we look at the many names of Shiva, we're looking at a catalog of a lot of syncretic sources. There's probably similar when we look at the many names of Vishnu, but I think that when we look at the avatars of Vishnu, with Vishnu, you'll see like the 10 avatars of Vishnu will be arranged in a painting, for example. I think there's something more going on there. I think there's a kind of virtue theoretical iconography going on there, where different avatars of Vishnu stand for different human virtues. And there's kind of a catalog of virtues. Again, all very axial age, all very mid-millennial. The last bullet point, just adding another philosophical note to that, the qualities or the properties, right, don't come to be and pass away. There are courageous men, and there are men who lack the property of being courageous. And there is the set of all courageous men now and the set of all courageous men 200 years ago. But this quality of courage is an immutable quality. And so that would be why Vishnu has these avatars. Chakra, which is actually a weapon, again, then the Vishanka, a conch shell. Shiva's son Ganesh steals Vishnu's Shanka in a famous passage. The Padma, which is the lotus leaf, and as we go on, we'll talk about the lotus more, very important, both the Hindu and Buddhist traditions. And the mace on the bottom, the scepter, which is, again, just a symbol of, generally a symbol of authority. So there he is. Vishnu, as you may have noted or may already know, is always blue. So what's with the blue? And there's basically, Vishnu represents the sky, probably the sky god. And as representing the sky represents infinite possibilities. Remember, Vishnu takes on all of these incarnations. Vishnu can take on any form. So Vishnu himself is this sort of limitless, infinite void of the sky. Also very kind of Buddhist sounding. Remember that when we get to Nagarjuna. Another story is that the color is simply metaphoric, that Vishnu just is simply not, so there isn't really an ordinary body of Vishnu, so we'll symbolize that by having an unusually blue body. And as the centuries go by, blue becomes kind of a royal color in this art tradition, and so you get any number of deities and avatars from time to time. You see them painted blue. You see Shiva painted blue all the time too. Originally, it's Vishnu. Vishnu, who is showing everybody how to live. You know, Shiva's changing your life. Vishnu's showing you how to live your life with what you've got. And this is the whole universe as Vishnu. Brahma, finally, again, as I say, Brahma is a different thing. It's more philosophical idea, the unifying condition, as I say there. So more, not so much the Old Testament as the New Testament God, the God that's making everything make sense, the God that has its purposes. And Brahma doesn't really, tradition in modern Hindu devotion, certainly, there's very little of an avatar of Brahma interacting with Hindu devotees. That's not really what it is. The Shiva, Vishnu, and we're going to talk a little bit now also about Devi, the female avatar. So Brahman, meaning the ultimate nature of the universe, as I say, in the second bullet point, a philosophical concept usually discussed as an abstraction. So really a very philosophical idea. Another thing, of course, we've seen, and we're going to see a lot more because we're going to talk about reincarnation and we're going to talk about karma. And so we're going to see that it is significant if we see that, strictly speaking, there's a sense in which soul participates only in a oneness and it is not an individual thing among a multiplicity of souls. You know, there's a way of talking, but there's philosophical issues there that we want to look at because that's what we're here to do. Okay, so the four face, the four Vedas, Brahma associated with the Vedas. The lotus, of course, the sacred flower of the Indian subcontinent, both Hindus and Buddhism, as I say. He's wise and old. He, again, is associated with the Vedas. There they say about the prayer beads, concentration. Also, though, with the prayer beads, you're talking about the passage of time. Running through the prayer beads is the movement of time. So that's something that ought to be mentioned. And he is also always associated with gold. He's also got not just a pot, but also a ladle. And the ladle and the pot are the ladle to make the devotions. And the pot is really the water flowing out, the water of creation flowing out, like the water flows out of Shiva's hair. The four-headed Brahma with the copy there you see of the Vedas in his hand. Wise old Brahma. And the swan actually rides around on the swan, which is interesting because of Lena and the swan. These connections are realer, I think, than people think. They're not actually as coincidental as people think. Okay, so finally, Devi and Shakti devotion. Shaktism, if you will, is just the worship of a feminine deity, of which there is an abundance in the Hindu tradition, by the way, and many of them very, very old. Its sort of generic term will be Devi, Lakshmi, Parvati, Saraswati. Parvati, for example, the consort of Shiva. So some of these female avatars will be sort of involved in the novella, if you will, with the male deities. Devi, just the incarnate kind of the Isis or mother goddess figure in this tradition. And she is very old, going back to the 3rd millennium BCE, which in Sanskrit iconography is very old. She, Parvati, the wife of Shiva, as I say, is an avatar of Devi. Not all of the female avatars will be considered avatars of Devi, but I guess that's kind of inside baseball. And the other thing about Devi is she's often in heroic positions, heroic postures, because in addition to in this, very traditional, I must say, rather male supremacist tradition in many ways. And so the female deities, as they say, will often be consorts of male deities and have other traditional female sex role characteristics. And Devi does too. But Devi also will, if in Shakti devotion, Devi is the supreme God. And so the supreme God is the one that has all of the godlike qualities. So Devi will be the warrior, and Devi will be the wise one. So it is rather striking. And again, Shakti is one of the three, along with the worship of Vishnu and the worship of Shiva, the worship of Devi, and in general, Shakti, feminine devotion, is one of the three main actual types of active votive practice in the Hindu tradition. So I think that's something that is not appreciated well enough. She is a righteous warrior like Rama, Ramayana. And you see here, she's kind of actually loaded with weapons there. She's got an arrow, she's got a discus, and she's got a sword, and she's got a trident, in addition to her mace and her lotus flower, and the tiger that she rides on. So don't mess with death. And here she is, full of lotus flowers. And always these beautiful bronze cast sculptures, all throughout all of classical India. Looking at some then various representations of the Trimurti. This certainly looks like a 19th century print to me. And its colors. And these magnificent bas-relief temple carvings, which are really one of the glories of the Indian art tradition. Again, some of them very, very old. First millennium BC is just usually what you're looking at. You're looking at archaeological sites. So as I say, so you have Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, and Devi, and the various other female deities. And so that's just, the very most minimal thing we might want to know about sort of Hindu religion, if you will, Hindu devotional practice. The main avatars of that: Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, and the woman Devi. So from there, again, I gave, for if you're in the class, those links that I gave you last Friday will serve for the links for this. All right, so there you have it. And thanks for your attention. Okay, bye-bye.